Lucia Zhao watched herself apologize for the 5th time in 10 minutes and wondered when exactly she'd become someone who apologized for breathing. The rehearsal studio smelled like old wood and expensive perfume, neither of which belonged to her, and she'd just stepped on Marco's foot again during the 3rd turn of the processional waltz. Her cousin was getting married in 3 weeks at a venue that cost more than Lucia's annual salary, and apparently everyone in the bridal party needed to know how to dance like they'd been born in a ballroom instead of, in Lucia's case, a 2-bedroom apartment above a Chinese restaurant in Queens. "I'm so sorry," she said again, to Marco, to the room, to the universe at large. Marco, who was marrying her cousin Jennifer, and who had never been anything but polite to her, smiled the way people smiled when they were trying very hard. "It's fine. Let's just try it one more time." The other bridesmaids had already mastered their steps. They stood in a cluster by the mirror, scrolling through their phones and occasionally glancing up to watch Lucia fail. She recognized the look. She'd been seeing versions of it since middle school, when she'd been the girl who brought homemade dumplings instead of Lunchables, who got picked last for teams, who sat alone at lunch until Jennifer took pity on her. 28 years old, and she was still that girl, still grateful for scraps of inclusion. The dance instructor hadn't said a word since the rehearsal began. He stood near the grand piano at the far end of the studio, hands clasped behind his back, watching everything with the stillness of someone who'd learned patience over centuries rather than years. Which was impossible, obviously. But Lucia had thought it anyway the first time she'd seen him, Iver Dragomir. The name itself sounded like it belonged in a Gothic novel, all hard consonants and European weight. He was tall, whip-thin, with white blonde hair pulled back in a way that should have looked pretentious, but instead looked like he'd been doing it since before her great-grandparents were born. His skin was so pale it seemed to drink the light, and his eyes were the color of smoke. He made her nervous. He made everyone nervous, actually, but the other bridesmaids covered it with giggling and hair-flipping. The maid of honor, Stephanie, had already asked him to drinks twice. He'd declined both times with perfect courtesy and zero warmth. "From the top," Iver said now, his voice carrying across the room without any effort. He had the faintest accent, something Eastern European that had been worn smooth by time. "Miss Zhao, you're anticipating the turn. Wait for your partner's lead." Lucia felt heat creep up her neck. "Right, sorry." His gaze rested on her for a moment, unreadable, then moved away. "Begin." The music started. She stepped on Marco's foot again. 3 weeks of this. 3 weeks of proving to everyone what they already knew, that she didn't quite fit, that she was here because Jennifer had a kind heart and a sense of family obligation, not because anyone actually wanted her there. She caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror, short, round-faced, wearing yoga pants and an old college sweatshirt, while everyone else looked like they'd stepped out of an athleisure catalog. Her hair was falling out of its ponytail. She had a small soy sauce stain on her sleeve from lunch. The song ended. Lucia extracted herself from Marco's arms and mumbled another apology. "Take 15 minutes, Iver said. The bridesmaids scattered immediately, Stephanie leading the charge toward the water bottles and conversation. Marco followed, leaving Lucia standing alone in the middle of the floor. She thought about leaving. She thought about faking an emergency, a sudden illness, anything that would let her escape with a shred of dignity. But Jennifer had asked her to do this, and Jennifer had always been good to her, and Lucia had never learned how to say no to people she loved. She became aware of Iver watching her. When she looked up, he was standing closer than she'd expected, maybe 10 feet away, his hands still clasped behind his back. "You're afraid," he said. It wasn't a question. Lucia's first instinct was to deny it, to smile and make a joke and deflect like she always did. Instead, she heard herself say, "I don't know why I'm even here." Something shifted in his expression, subtle as breath. "Neither do they, which means they won't notice if you stop performing for them." "I'm not performing." "You've apologized 47 times since you walked in. That's a performance." The precision of it startled her. She stared at him, this strange, cold man who apparently counted her apologies like a miser counted coins. "Why do you care?" He was quiet for a long moment. The silence stretched between them, weighted with something she couldn't name. Then he said, "Your grandmother once did me a great kindness. I owed her a debt. This venue belongs to me. I'm teaching this class as payment, since she's no longer here to collect in any other form. Lucia blinked. My grandmother? Zhao Meilin? She never mentioned me. I made certain of that. But yes, her grandmother had died when Lucia was 20, a tiny, fierce woman who'd survived famine and revolution and immigration, who'd worked 16-hour days in the restaurant until her body gave out. Lucia had loved her more than almost anyone. The idea that this pale stranger had known her, that there was some hidden debt connecting them across death, made the room feel suddenly smaller. What kind of kindness? Lucia asked. The kind that matters? Iver turned away before she could ask anything else. The kind I can never repay, but I try. Learn the steps, Miss Zhao, not for them, for yourself. He walked back to the piano. The 15 minutes ended. The rehearsal continued. Lucia stepped on Marco's foot twice more, but she stopped apologizing. The second rehearsal was worse. Jennifer had insisted on practicing the reception dances, which meant everyone needed partners for the waltz, the foxtrot, and something complicated that Stephanie kept calling the Viennese. The groomsmen arrived in a pack, all of them investment bankers or lawyers who'd known Marco since college, all of them looking at their phones more than the bridesmaids. They picked partners like they were choosing fruit at a market. Stephanie got claimed first, obviously, then Claire, then Amanda. Lucia watched the groomsmen's eyes skip over her again and again until only one man was left. Derek, the best man, who was doing a terrible job of hiding his disappointment. Guess we're paired up, he said, with all the enthusiasm of someone being told they'd need a root canal. Lucky you, Lucia said flatly. Derek had the grace to look embarrassed. Sorry, I'm terrible at dancing. He wasn't. He was fine. Mediocre, maybe, but confident enough that it didn't matter. Lucia realized with a cold sinking feeling that he wasn't upset about his dancing. He was upset about having to dance with her, with the bridesmaid no one wanted to dance with, the one who didn't quite match the aesthetic Jennifer had worked so hard to create. The music started. Derek held her like she might stain his suit. Lucia felt something crack open in her chest, something that had been cracking for years, small fractures accumulating until the whole structure threatened to collapse. She was 28 years old. She had a good job, a decent apartment, friends who called her when they needed something. She wasn't supposed to still feel like this, like the girl no one picked, like she was always, perpetually, too much and not enough at the same time. Stop, Iver said. The music cut off. Everyone froze. Iver was watching Derek with an expression that Lucia couldn't quite read, something cold and considering. You're holding her incorrectly, Iver said. Frame. Derek adjusted his grip, but Iver shook his head. No, step aside. There was a command in his voice that Derek didn't question. He stepped back immediately, and Iver closed the distance between himself and Lucia in 3 long strides. He extended his hand. She took it without thinking. His palm was cool against hers. Not cold exactly, but lacking the warmth she'd expected. He placed his other hand on her back, fingers splayed just below her shoulder blade, and suddenly she understood what Derek had been doing wrong. This was a frame. This was what it meant to be held properly, to feel the structure of the dance in your bones. Follow, Iver said quietly, and the music began again. He led her through the waltz with absolute certainty. Every step was precise, every turn perfectly timed. He made it easy. He made it feel like she'd been dancing her whole life, like her body knew exactly what to do as long as she trusted his lead. She realized halfway through that she wasn't thinking anymore, wasn't counting or worrying or apologizing in her head. She was just dancing. The song ended. Iver released her and stepped back. The room was silent. Lucia looked around and found everyone staring at them, the bridesmaids with something like shock, the groomsmen with expressions ranging from confusion to what might have been jealousy. Ah. That, Iver said, still looking at Lucia, is how it should feel. Everyone, switch partners. We're rotating every song until you all understand what a proper frame requires. The rehearsal continued, but something had shifted. Lucia danced with 3 different groomsmen over the next hour, and none of them held her the way Derek had, like she was an inconvenience. They were careful, polite. She suspected Iver had somehow communicated something without words, some unspoken command that she'd earned basic respect. When the rehearsal ended, she waited until everyone else had left before approaching him. He was putting sheet music away at the piano, moving with the same precise economy of motion he brought to everything. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "You know what?" Iver glanced at her. "I was correcting poor technique, nothing more." "You were doing more than that." He didn't deny it. Instead, he said, "Your grandmother asked me once to promise something. She said her granddaughter would be beautiful and kind, and that the world would punish her for both. She asked me to watch for you if I could, if our paths crossed. I didn't think they would. But then Jennifer Zhao came to rent this venue, and she mentioned her cousin would be in the wedding party, and I heard your name." Lucia's throat tightened. "She said that? That I was beautiful?" "You are." He said it so simply, like he was stating a fact about the weather. Lucia felt something hot and sharp behind her eyes. She blinked hard, refusing to cry in front of this strange man who'd known her grandmother, who'd made a promise to a dead woman and was keeping it for reasons she didn't understand. "I don't feel beautiful," she said. "No, you feel unwanted. That's different." The accuracy of it stole her breath. Iver continued putting music away, not looking at her, giving her space to compose herself. When he finally spoke again, his voice was softer. "Come to the Tuesday rehearsals as well. Individual practice. I'm opening them to anyone in the wedding party who wants extra help." "Is anyone else coming?" "No." "Then why?" "Because you need them. And because I promised your grandmother I would help if I could. Come Tuesday at 7. Lucia wanted to refuse, wanted to say she didn't need charity or pity or whatever this was, but she thought about the way it had felt to dance in his arms, to feel competent and steady and almost graceful. She thought about her grandmother, fierce and loving, making this man promise to look out for her. "Okay," she said, "I'll be there." She came Tuesday. The studio was empty except for Iver, waiting by the piano. He'd brought tea, loose leaf in a proper pot, which he poured into 2 cups without asking if she wanted any. It smelled like jasmine and something darker, earthier. "We're not dancing tonight," he said. Lucia paused halfway to the floor. "We're not?" "No, we're talking. Sit." There were chairs near the window, old wingbacks that looked like they belonged in a library. Lucia sat. Iver settled across from her, long legs crossed, teacup balanced on his knee. Up close like this, she could see details she'd missed before: the sharpness of his cheekbones, the way his eyes caught the light like polished stone. He was handsome in a way that didn't feel human, too refined and symmetrical, ageless in a way that made her want to ask questions she suspected he wouldn't answer. "Tell me about yourself," he said. "Why?" "Because good dancing's about connection, and I can't connect with someone I don't know." It was a line, probably, but his voice was sincere, and Lucia was tired of performing, tired of being the version of herself that made other people comfortable. So she told him. About growing up above the restaurant, about her grandmother's stories of surviving the Cultural Revolution, about being the first in her family to finish college, about her job as a medical translator at Mount Sinai, helping patients and doctors understand each other across language barriers. About Jennifer, who'd been the pretty cousin, the successful one, who'd still always made room for Lucia at family gatherings, even when Lucia felt like an afterthought. "And now you're in her wedding," Iver said. "Now I'm in her wedding, proving that I still don't fit, that I'm still the cousin everyone tolerates." "Is that what you think? That they tolerate you?" Lucia shrugged. "Isn't it true? You saw Derek's face when he got stuck with me. I saw a mediocre man uncomfortable with his own mediocrity. That has nothing to do with you. Easy for you to say." "Is it?" Iver set down his teacup. "I've spent my life watching humans decide each other's worth based on appearance, status, the arbitrary cruelty of social hierarchy. It never stops being exhausting. Your grandmother understood that. She lived through worse, and she came out kind. She said you were the same. Was she wrong?" "I don't know," Lucia said honestly. "I'm kind because I'm afraid if I'm not, people will have even less reason to keep me around." Iver was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Come, let's dance." They danced. He put on old music, big band arrangements from decades ago, and he taught her not just the steps, but the feeling behind them. How to take up space without apologizing for it. How to accept a lead without collapsing into submission. How to be present in her own body instead of watching herself from the outside, cataloging everything wrong. "You're thinking again," he said during a slow turn. "Feel instead." "I don't know how." "Yes, you do. You're just afraid you'll do it wrong. There's no wrong. There's only movement and honesty. Show me what the music makes you feel." Lucia closed her eyes, let the melody sink into her bones, let herself sway and step and turn without counting, without planning. When she opened her eyes again, Iver was watching her with something that might have been satisfaction. "Better," he said. They practiced for 2 hours. When it was over, Lucia felt exhausted and exhilarated, her legs aching, her heart light. Iver walked her to the door. "Same time Thursday?" he asked. "There's no rehearsal Thursday." "No, but you'll come anyway." It wasn't a question. Lucia found herself nodding. "Okay, yes." His mouth curved very slightly, not quite a smile. Good. She came Thursday, and Tuesday again, and Thursday after that. The main rehearsals continued on Saturdays, but those extra sessions became something separate, something private. They talked more than they danced some nights. Iver told her about cities he'd lived in, Vienna and Budapest, and places she'd never heard of, old names for old places. He never mentioned dates or years, but Lucia started noticing things. The way he talked about historical events like he'd witnessed them. The way his hands looked unlined and young, but moved with ancient precision. The fact that she'd never seen him in daylight, that all their sessions were evening or night. "You're not human," she said one Tuesday in the third week. They were dancing a slow foxtrot. Iver didn't miss a step. "No. What are you? What do you think?" Lucia looked at his white hair, his pale skin, the careful way he'd arranged every rehearsal to end before dawn. "Vampire." Yes. She should have been afraid. She wasn't. Somewhere in the last 3 weeks, Iver had become something like a friend, or maybe more than a friend, though she didn't let herself think about that too hard. He'd never touched her with anything but perfect propriety. Never looked at her the way men looked at women they desired. She was his dead friend's granddaughter, a promise he was keeping, nothing more. "Does Jennifer know?" Lucia asked. "That you're—" "No, the venue's ownership goes through several shell companies. As far as she knows, I'm simply the dance instructor the coordinator recommended." "Why tell me?" "Because you asked, and because you deserved honesty." They finished the dance. Iver released her and walked to the window, looking out at the dark city. Lucia joined him. From here she could see the lights of Manhattan spreading out like stars. "My grandmother knew," she said. "Yes, she figured it out 40 years ago, when I made the mistake of renting an apartment in her building under a name I'd used a century earlier. She found old photographs, confronted me. I expected fear or greed, demands for immortality or wealth. Instead, she invited me for tea and asked if I was lonely." Lucia could picture it exactly. Her grandmother, tiny and fierce and utterly unafraid, offering comfort to a monster. "What did you say?" "I said yes, and she became my friend, the only real friend I'd had in 200 years. When she was dying, she asked me to promise to watch over you if I could. She said you'd inherited her heart, and the world wasn't kind to women with hearts like that. So you're here because of a promise." "I'm here because of a debt," Iver corrected, "and because when I saw you in that first rehearsal, apologizing for existing, I understood exactly what she'd meant. You're being crushed under the weight of other people's expectations, Lucia, and you're so used to it, you don't even notice anymore." The use of her first name sent something warm through her chest. He'd been calling her Miss Zhao for weeks. "I notice. Then stop carrying it." "I don't know how." "Yes, you do. You're doing it now. Every time you walk into this studio, every time you dance with me without apologizing, you're remembering who you are under all that weight. Your grandmother saw that person. So do I." Lucia looked at him, this impossible man who'd lived for centuries, who could probably crush her without effort, but instead spend his evenings teaching her to waltz. "Why do you care so much?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. He was quiet for a long time, staring out at the city. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. At first, it was the promise, but that's not why anymore. Then why? He turned to face her fully. The moonlight coming through the window cast silver highlights across his white hair, made his eyes look almost luminous. Because you're brilliant and kind and beautiful, and watching you believe you're none of those things is unbearable. Because somewhere in the last 3 weeks, making sure you never feel unwanted again became the most important thing in my life. Because I've fallen in love with you, Lucia, and I wasn't supposed to, and I can't stop. The world tilted. Lucia heard the words but couldn't make them fit together into meaning. You what? I'm in love with you. He said it like he was confessing a crime. I know it's impossible. I know you don't feel the same. I'm a vampire, a monster, something that shouldn't exist, and you're your grandmother's legacy, the last person in the world I should want this way. But I do. I have for weeks. Since when? Since the first rehearsal. Since I watched you apologize for the 47th time and wanted to burn down everything that made you feel you needed to. Since you took my hand and let me lead you through that waltz and trusted me completely without knowing anything about me. Since every moment after that. Lucia's heart was hammering. She thought about every extra rehearsal, every conversation, every careful way he'd touched her while dancing. She'd thought she was imagining the weight behind his looks, the way his attention felt like being seen for the first time in her life. The maid of honor asked you out, she said, scrambling for logic. Stephanie, she's gorgeous and you turned her down. Because she isn't you. I heard her ask what your type was, and you said, Lucia paused, remembering. He'd said something that hadn't made sense at the time. Something about preferring women who were kind rather than decorative, who apologized too much because they cared too much, who made the world gentler by existing in it. She'd thought it was a general statement. You were describing me. Yes? Why didn't you say anything? Iver's expression shuddered. Because I can't have you. Because the debt I owe your grandmother isn't just gratitude. I made her a blood oath, Lucia. A binding promise sealed with magic. I swore I would never entangle her bloodline with mine, never bring the danger of my world into your family, never touch her granddaughter the way vampires touch humans they claim. It's why I stayed away for 28 years. Why I only came when I could hide behind the excuse of this wedding, this venue, this final payment on an old debt. But you're here now. I'm here to teach you to dance, nothing more. That's the only loophole I could justify, the only way to keep my promise and still honor what she asked. But I can't cross that line. If I pursue you, claim you, love you the way I want to, I break the oath. And breaking a blood oath doesn't just hurt me. It ripples out, causes harm in ways I can't predict or control. I won't risk you for my own desires. Lucia processed this slowly. A blood oath. Magic. The weight of promises made to dead women. It should have sounded insane, but Iver's face was stark with honesty, and she'd already accepted he was a vampire. Why not magic? Why not consequences? What would happen, she asked, if you broke it? I don't know, that's the problem. Blood oaths are ancient magic, older than most vampires. Breaking one could kill me, could curse your family, could do nothing at all, or something worse than I can imagine. I won't gamble with your life. What if I want to gamble? Lucia. No, listen. She stepped closer, her heart still racing, but her mind suddenly clear. You just told me you've been teaching me to stop carrying other people's expectations, to remember who I am under all the weight, and now you're making my choices for me, deciding what I can risk, what I'm allowed to want. That's the same thing, Iver. That's you putting your fear on me and calling it protection. He stared at her. You don't understand what you're asking. Don't I? You said you love me. Did you mean it? Yes. God help me, yes. Then let me decide what I'm willing to risk. She reached out and took his hand. His fingers were cool, long and elegant, and they trembled slightly against hers. I don't know if I love you yet, but I know I feel something. I know I've spent 3 weeks looking forward to seeing you. I know I trust you more than I've trusted anyone in years. And I know my grandmother wouldn't have made you promise to stay away if she didn't think there was a chance we'd find each other. She was trying to protect me from exactly what she knew could happen. But I'm not her, and I'm not afraid. You should be. Maybe. But I'm not. Lucia squeezed his hand. You have 1 week left. One more rehearsal before the wedding. If you don't want to break your oath, fine, I understand. But don't pretend it's for my sake. Don't tell me you love me and then treat me like I'm too fragile to make my own choices." Iver pulled his hand away like she'd burned him. He turned back to the window, his shoulders rigid. "You should go." "Iver, please, I need to think." Lucia wanted to argue, wanted to push, but she could hear the strain in his voice, the careful control fracturing around the edges, and she realized that pushing now would only make him pull further away. So she left, grabbing her bag and walking out into the cool November night, her mind spinning with everything that had just happened. She didn't hear from him for 3 days. The final rehearsal before the wedding was Saturday. Lucia arrived early, her stomach knotted with nerves. She'd replayed their conversation 100 times, wondering if she'd pushed too hard, if she'd ruined everything. The studio was already full, bridesmaids and groomsmen and Jennifer and Marco, everyone chattering about last-minute details. Iver stood by the piano watching her. His expression gave away nothing. They ran through the processional, the recessional, every choreographed moment of the reception. Iver was professional, distant, directing everyone with his usual precision. He didn't single Lucia out, didn't look at her more than anyone else. When they broke for water, Stephanie cornered him again, laughing and touching his arm, and Lucia watched him smile politely and extract himself with practiced ease. She felt hollow. The rehearsal ended. Everyone left in groups, heading to the rehearsal dinner at some restaurant Lucia couldn't afford and hadn't been invited to plan. She lingered, putting her shoes in her bag slowly, hoping Iver would say something. He waited until everyone was gone. Then he crossed the floor and stood in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began. Lucia's heart jumped. "And?" "You were right. I was making your choices for you, putting my fear on you. Your grandmother did the same thing when she made me promise to stay away, and I was honoring that fear instead of honoring you. So I've decided." "Decided what?" "The wedding is next Saturday. After it's over, after I've fulfilled my obligation to this venue and this debt, I'm going to court you properly. I'm going to take you to dinner and walk you home and ask if I can kiss you. And if you say yes, I'll break the oath and accept whatever consequences come. Because you're right. You get to choose. And if you choose me, I won't insult you by refusing." Relief flooded through her so fast she felt dizzy. "You mean it?" "I mean it, but not before the wedding. I need to see this through, finish what I promised your grandmother. After that, I'm yours if you'll have me." Lucia wanted to argue that waiting was stupid, that they should just break the oath now, tonight, together. But she could see how much this mattered to him, finishing the obligation cleanly, keeping his word to her grandmother one final time before moving forward. And maybe she needed the time, too, to be sure this wasn't just gratitude or loneliness disguised as love. "Okay," she said. After the wedding, Ivor's shoulders relaxed slightly. "After the wedding, but Lucia..." "What?" "Dance with me. One last time before everything changes." He held out his hand. She took it. He pulled her into frame and the music started, something slow and old and achingly beautiful. They danced through one song, then another, not speaking, just moving together in the empty studio. Lucia rested her head against his chest and heard no heartbeat, just the stillness of something that had been alive so long it had outlived the need for breath. "I'm going to love you," she said quietly. "I think I already do. I'm just scared to say it." His hand tightened on her back. "Don't be scared. Not of this. You're a vampire. You'll live forever. I'll get old and die. I know. I'm choosing that. Choosing years with you over centuries without you. That's what love is, Lucia. Choosing the finite and precious over the infinite and empty." She tilted her head back to look at him. His eyes were soft. All the cold calculation she'd seen that first day melted into something warm and real. 1 week, and then I'm yours. Promise?" "I promise." They kissed then, breaking his own rule, unable to help it. His mouth was cool against hers, gentle and certain, tasting like tea and night air. Lucia felt something slot into place in her chest, some piece of herself she hadn't known was missing. When they broke apart, Iver was looking at her like she was something miraculous. 1 week, he repeated. 1 week. The wedding was beautiful. Jennifer had planned everything down to the last detail, and the venue, Iver's venue, though no one else knew, looked like something out of a fairy tale. The ceremony was in the ballroom, under chandeliers that threw rainbow light across the floor, and the reception was set up in the garden courtyard, strings of lights overhead and flowers everywhere. Lucia stood in the bridal party line during the ceremony, wearing a dress Jennifer had picked out, her hair done by a stylist who'd made her look almost pretty. She watched her cousin marry a good man who loved her, and she felt genuinely happy. Jennifer deserved this. She'd always been kind, even when Lucia was difficult to be kind to. The ceremony ended. The reception began. Lucia found herself at a table with the other bridesmaids, watching people dance. Stephanie was complaining about the groomsmen, how none of them were as good as the dance instructor. "Where is he anyway?" she asked. "I wanted to get his number." "He's around somewhere," Claire said. "I saw him earlier." Lucia scanned the room and found Iver standing near the edge of the garden, half in shadow, watching everything with his usual stillness. He caught her eye, and something passed between them, a promise that in a few more hours this would be over, and they could start their real life together. The dancing started. The first dance was Jennifer and Marco spinning across the floor to some romantic song. Then the father-daughter dance, the mother-son dance, all the traditional moments. Finally, the DJ announced the bridal party dance, and the bridesmaids and groomsmen were supposed to take the floor. Lucia watched the other bridesmaids get claimed immediately. Stephanie with the best man, Claire with one of Marco's college friends, Amanda paired up with a cousin, and Lucia stood alone at the edge of the dance floor, watching everyone else spin and laugh, that old familiar feeling creeping back in. The girl no one danced with, the afterthought, the one who didn't quite belong. She was turning away, ready to slip back to her table and wait for this part to be over, when a cool hand caught hers. Iver stood beside her, dressed in a dark suit that made him look even more dangerous and elegant than usual. He didn't ask. He simply pulled her onto the dance floor, into frame, and began to waltz with the easy confidence of someone who'd been dancing since before waltzes had names. The room fell away. Lucia followed his lead without thinking, her body remembering every lesson from the last 3 weeks. They turned and glided and spun, and she felt beautiful for the first time in her life, not because of the dress or the hair or any external thing, but because of the way he looked at her, like she was the only person in the room, like she'd always been the only person. "You're breaking the rules," she murmured as they turned past the band. "The dance isn't over. You're still obligated to the venue." "I know. So you're breaking the oath?" "Yes." "Why now?" Iver's grip on her hand tightened slightly. "Because I watched you stand alone for 30 seconds and realized I'd rather face any consequence than let you feel unwanted for one more moment. Because my promise to your grandmother was to protect you. And protecting you means making sure you know you're loved, desired, chosen. Because I'm a selfish creature, Lucia, and I want you more than I want safety." They spun through another turn. Lucia could feel people watching now, curious and confused about why the dance instructor was dancing with the bridesmaid everyone ignored. She didn't care. For once in her life, she didn't care what anyone else thought. "What happens now?" she asked. "I don't know. The oath is broken. We wait and see what comes." The song ended. They stopped in the center of the floor, still holding each other. Iver looked down at her with something like wonder on his face. "I love you," he said clearly, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. "I've loved you for weeks, and I'm going to keep loving you for as long as you'll let me." Lucia felt tears prick her eyes. Happy tears, the kind she didn't remember ever crying. "I love you too." He kissed her there in front of everyone, in the middle of the dance floor at her cousin's wedding. It was impulsive and dramatic and completely unlike either of them, and Lucia kissed him back like her life depended on it. When they broke apart, the room was staring. Jennifer had made her way over, her wedding dress trailing, her expression somewhere between shocked and delighted. "Lucia? Who is this?" "Iver Dragomir," Iver said smoothly, not letting go of Lucia. "I own the venue, and I'm in love with your cousin. I apologize for disrupting your reception." Jennifer looked between them, processing. Then she started laughing, the kind of genuine surprised laughter that couldn't be faked. "Oh my God, Lucia, you've been secretly dating the hot dance instructor." "Not dating," Lucia said. "Not yet, it's complicated." "Clearly," Jennifer was still grinning. But you're happy?" "Yes." "Then I'm happy. Just don't steal focus from my wedding for too long, okay?" She swept away, back to Marco, and the DJ started another song. The moment passed. People went back to dancing, to drinking, to celebrating. Iver led Lucia off the floor, through the garden, out into the quiet street beyond the venue. "Did anything happen?" Lucia asked. "From breaking the oath?" "I don't know yet. Blood magic takes time, but I feel—" He paused, looking down at his hands. "I feel lighter, like a weight I didn't realize I was carrying is gone. Maybe the consequence is that there isn't one. Maybe my grandmother's magic was just keeping you away until I was old enough to choose for myself." "Maybe." Iver pulled her close, his arms around her waist. "Or maybe it's coming and we'll face it together. Either way, I don't regret this." "Neither do I." They stood there in the quiet, the sounds of the reception muffled behind them, the November air cool against Lucia's skin. She thought about everything that had led to this moment, her grandmother's secret friendship with a vampire, a promise made decades ago, 3 weeks of dance lessons that had turned into something neither of them expected. It felt impossible. It felt inevitable. "What do we do now?" she asked. "Now I take you to dinner tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. I court you properly, the way you deserve. And if you'll have me, when you're ready, I ask you to be mine permanently." "Permanently as in marriage?" "As in binding. A vampire's promise to a human they love. It's not immortality, but it's time. Years added to your life, enough that we can have decades together instead of a handful. If that's what you want." Lucia's breath caught. More time. A real lifetime together, not cut short by the cruelty of her mortality against his immortality. "I want that. Eventually, when we're ready. Then that's what we'll have." They went back to the reception after a while, rejoining the party. Lucia danced with Marco, with Jennifer's father, with Derek, who apologized quietly for being an ass during rehearsals. But mostly she danced with Iver, again and again, until the night wound down and the guests started leaving. Jennifer hugged her at the end of the night. "I'm glad you're happy, Lou. You deserve it. You always have." "Thanks, Jen. And bring him to Christmas. I want to actually meet him properly." Lucia laughed. "I will, I promise." She left with Iver, his hand warm cool in hers. He walked her to her apartment in Queens, a long walk they could have taken a car for but didn't, both of them wanting to stretch the night out. At her door, he kissed her again, slower this time, sweet and full of promise. "Tomorrow," he said. "I'll pick you up at 7. "Tomorrow," Lucia agreed. She watched him disappear into the night, moving with that inhuman speed she'd suspected but never seen. And then she went inside and collapsed on her couch, exhausted and exhilarated, and more herself than she'd felt in years. Tomorrow came, and the day after, and the day after that. Iver courted her exactly the way he'd promised, with dinners and walks and long conversations that lasted until dawn. He introduced her to his world slowly, carefully, the vampire community hidden under New York's surface, the politics and power structures that govern them, the dangers that came with loving someone like him. Lucia met them all with the same steady courage she'd inherited from her grandmother, asking questions and setting boundaries and refusing to be intimidated. 3 months in, they went back to Zhao Mei Lin's grave. Lucia brought flowers. Iver stood beside her, his hand in hers, and they told her grandmother together that they were happy, that her promise had been kept and then broken in the best possible way, that Lucia was loved and chosen and would never feel unwanted again. The blood oath's consequences, if there were any, never materialized. Iver's theory was that Mei Lin had structured it to keep him away until Lucia was old enough to make her own choices, and that breaking it once she had was always part of the plan. A final gift from a woman who'd understood love better than most. 6 months in, Iver asked Lucia to bind with him. They did it privately, in the same studio where they had first danced, with a simple ceremony that involved blood and promises and magic Lucia still didn't fully understand. But she felt it take hold, felt something shift in her body, time stretching out ahead of her where before it had been finite. The doctors couldn't explain why her aging seemed to slow, why she stayed healthy and strong year after year. Lucia didn't bother trying to make them understand. A year in, they moved in together, to a brownstone in Brooklyn that had enough windows for Lucia and enough darkness for Iver. They built a life there, small and strange in theirs. Lucia kept working at the hospital, translating and helping. Iver managed his properties and taught dance at night, occasionally taking students who needed the same kind of careful attention he'd given Lucia. 2 years in, Lucia found out she was pregnant. It shouldn't have been possible, human and vampire biology being what they were, but Mei Lin's magic had apparently had one more surprise in store. The doctors called it a miracle. Iver called it terrifying. Lucia called it perfect. They had a daughter, named her Nadia after Iver's mother from 2 centuries ago. She had Lucia's dark eyes and Iver's pale skin, a perfect blend of both their worlds. She grew up knowing what her father was, knowing the danger and beauty of the life they'd chosen, and she was fearless in the way children of love always are. 3 years after that, Lucia inherited a vineyard from a distant relative she'd barely known. It was upstate, a few hours from the city, old and overgrown but salvageable. They moved there when Nadia was 5, to rolling hills and quiet nights and a pace of life that felt impossible after decades in New York. Iver restored the vineyard slowly, using strength and patience that only an immortal could bring to the work. Lucia tended the vines and learned winemaking, discovering a talent she hadn't known she had. They made wine under their own label, Iver Dragomir, a blend of their histories. It won awards. Critics called it haunting and complex, not knowing how accurate that description was. The vineyard became a haven for the local vampire community, a safe place where they could gather without hiding, where Nadia could grow up knowing both sides of her heritage. Jennifer visited often, bringing her own children to play with Nadia. She'd figured out what Iver was after a few years, putting together clues that would have been invisible to someone who loved her cousin less. She'd taken it with characteristic grace, making Iver promise to keep Lucia safe, and then treating him like family. Marco never knew, but he didn't need to. He was happy and his wife was happy, and that was enough. The years passed. Lucia stayed young longer than she should have, the binding holding back time's grip. She got to watch Nadia grow up, got to see her daughter fall in love with a quiet artist who painted the vineyard in different seasons, got to hold a grandchild, a little boy with Iver's silver eyes and her grandmother's fierce spirit. Iver stayed exactly the same, ageless and constant, but the coldness she'd noticed in him that first day never returned. He was warm in the ways that mattered, present and devoted, the kind of partner who made life feel both safe and adventurous. He still taught her to dance sometimes, in the kitchen late at night when everyone else was asleep, swaying to music only they could hear. They never forgot what it had cost to find each other, the promises made and broken, the risks taken, the moment on that dance floor when he'd chosen her over safety. Lucia kept a photo from Jennifer's wedding on her desk, the two of them mid-waltz, her face lit with joy she'd never expected to feel. Sometimes tourists would visit the vineyard and ask about their story, how they'd met. Lucia always smiled and said they'd met at a wedding, that he'd asked her to dance, and she'd said yes, and that had been enough. It was true, as far as it went. The rest, the vampires and the magic and the grandmother, who'd arranged everything from beyond the grave, was theirs to keep. Decades passed. Lucia aged slowly, but still aged, her hair going gray, her hands growing lined. Iver watched her change with something like reverence, loving every new marked time left on her. He'd chosen the finite and precious over the infinite and empty, and he never once regretted it. On her 85th birthday, surrounded by children and grandchildren and a great-grandchild who'd inherited Nadia's fearlessness, Lucia looked around at the life she'd built and felt nothing but gratitude. Gratitude for her grandmother, for her cousin, for a vampire who'd kept a promise and then broken it at exactly the right moment. Gratitude for every dance, every risk, every choice that had led her here. Iver found her later that night, sitting on the porch and watching the sunset over the vineyard. He sat beside her, taking her hand, his fingers still cool after all these years. "Happy?" he asked. "So happy I can barely stand it," Lucia said honestly. "Good. That's all I ever wanted. Your happiness." She leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "Do you remember that first rehearsal?" When I apologized 47 times, I remember everything. I was so sure no one would ever want me, that I'd always be the girl people settled for. And now I know I was wrong. Now I know I was always worth wanting. I just needed someone to see it. Iver kissed the top of her head. I saw it. I see it. I'll see it until the day you leave this world, and I'll carry the memory of you for centuries after. You made my endless life finite and precious, Lucia. You made it mean something. You made me feel chosen. You were always chosen. From the moment I saw you, you were always, always chosen. They sat there until the stars came out, two people who'd found each other against every odd, who'd built a life out of broken promises and brave choices. The vineyard stretched out around them, full of family and laughter and love, proof that sometimes the best stories start with a girl who felt unwanted and a vampire who knew better. Lucia Zhao had spent 28 years believing she was someone people tolerated. It took a vampire king waltzing her at a wedding, deliberately and publicly, to show her the truth, that she'd never been unwanted at all. She'd just been waiting for someone who could see her clearly. And once she'd been seen, really, truly seen, she'd never forgotten again. The wedding had changed everything. That single dance in front of everyone had rewritten her story. Not because it made her different, but because it proved she'd always been enough. Iver hadn't transformed her. He'd just loved her until she remembered how to love herself. Years later, when people asked Lucia what she'd learned from her impossible love story, she always gave the same answer, that feeling unwanted is different from being unwanted. That sometimes all it takes is one person seeing you clearly to change everything. That love, real love, doesn't ask you to be different. It just asks you to be brave enough to be yourself. And that dancing, really dancing, with someone who holds you like you matter, can heal wounds you didn't even know you were carrying. She'd gone to a wedding as the bridesmaid no one danced with. She'd left as someone chosen, loved, wanted beyond measure. And she'd built a whole life on the foundation of that single moment when a vampire king had walked across a dance floor and claimed her in front of everyone who'd ever overlooked her. It had been enough. More than enough. It had been everything. In the end, that was the real magic. Not the vampire bond or the extended life or the vineyard or the family. The real magic was that Lucia Zhao had learned to take up space without apologizing, to accept love without questioning it, to believe she deserved the life she'd built. She'd forgotten she'd ever felt unwanted at all. And that forgetting, that complete and total transformation of how she saw herself, was the greatest gift Iver had ever given her. Well, that and the dancing. Always the dancing. On their 50th wedding anniversary, they held a party at the vineyard. The whole family came. 3 generations gathered under string lights and stars. Someone had hired a band, and when they started playing, Iver found Lucia in the crowd and extended his hand exactly the way he had that first night in the studio. "May I have this dance?" he asked, formal and perfect. Lucia took his hand, still fitting in as exactly right after all these years. Always. They danced, and their children danced, and their grandchildren danced, and the vineyard was full of music and light and joy. Lucia thought about her grandmother, long dead but somehow present in every moment, her final gift still unfolding decades later. She thought about the girl she'd been, standing on the edge of a dance floor and feeling invisible. That girl was gone. In her place was a woman who'd been chosen and who'd chosen back, who'd built a life out of courage and love, who'd learned that the right person doesn't complete you, they just help you remember who you always were. "Thank you," she whispered to Iver as they turned past the vineyard's edge. "For what?" "For seeing me, for dancing with me, for loving me until I learned to love myself." Iver smiled, that rare, true smile she'd spent 50 years earning. "Lucia Zhao, later Dragomir, you were always easy to love. You just needed to believe it. I believe it now. Good, because I plan to keep proving it for as long as we have." They danced until the sun threatened the horizon, until Iver had to retreat inside, and Lucia finally sat down, her old bones tired, but her heart completely full. She watched the party continue without them, her family celebrating, everyone she loved in one place. She'd started as the bridesmaid no one danced with. She'd become the woman everyone wanted to be. Not because she'd changed, but because she'd finally let herself be seen. And in the end, that made all the difference. The story of Lucia and Iver became family legend, passed down through generations. The tale of how a vampire king had fallen in love with a girl at a wedding, how he'd broken an ancient oath to dance with her, how their love had created a family and a vineyard and a legacy that outlasted any magic. Their grandchildren told their children, who told their children, and the story never died. It lived on in every dance at every wedding, in every person who felt overlooked until someone saw them clearly, in every moment when love proved stronger than fear. And somewhere in the vineyard, on quiet nights when the wind was right, you could still hear music. Old music, the kind that made you want to dance, the kind that reminded you that you were always, always wanted. You'd just been waiting for the right person to prove it. Lucia Zhao had waited 28 years, but when her vampire finally came, when he finally took her hand and led her onto that dance floor, it had been worth every moment of doubt, every year of feeling unseen. Because being chosen by the right person doesn't just change your present, it redeems your past, makes sense of all the waiting, transforms every lonely moment into a necessary step on the path to love. She'd forgotten she'd ever felt unwanted, and in forgetting, she'd become exactly who she was always meant to be. Loved, chosen, seen, and absolutely, perfectly, completely herself. That was the real ending. Not the wedding or the binding or even the decades together. The real ending was the moment Lucia looked in the mirror and didn't see someone apologizing for existing. She saw someone loved. Someone chosen. Someone who'd always, always been enough. And once she saw that, she never unseen it again. The vineyard flourished, the family grew, the love endured. And somewhere, in whatever comes after, Zhao Meilin watched her granddaughter dance through a life full of joy and thought, yes, this is exactly what I hoped for. A girl who learned she was wanted, a vampire who learned he could love, a promise kept and broken and redeemed, a single dance that changed everything. That was the story. That was always the story. From the first apology to the last dance, from feeling invisible to being seen, from the bridesmaid no one danced with to the woman a vampire king couldn't live without. It was a story about dancing, yes, but more than that, it was a story about remembering your own worth, about letting yourself be loved, about the way the right person doesn't fix you, they just hold up a mirror until you can see yourself the way they've seen you all along, beautiful, wanted, chosen. Enough, always, always enough, and that in the end was everything.